Guess we won't have to worry about turning the camera today.
Early.
What?
Early.
Yes. Not much. 57.
What is issue 1, this ballot?
Oh, okay. In case anybody hasn't seen it, remember when I told you to vote no on issue 1 the last time?
Why, well, I can't hear you.
The last time we were advised or encouraged to vote no on issue 1. That was the one that would have changed the amendment on freedom of choice. Now it's on the ballot. That the amendment that we kept on the ballot is on the ballot. So now you want to vote yes on issue 1.
I don't think that should be up there.
Where do you want to put it?
I don't think it should be posted anywhere. I think, did the church take an official position on that?
Are you objecting to it? If you're objecting to it, I'll take it down. Does anybody else object to it?
Yeah, I think it's up to the individual people to decide.
Anybody that wants one of these, please contact me and I will get you a sign to put in your yard.
I put one, I requested one for the shop.
Okay. We have to request them through the people that organize this, and you have to give me your address. And I've got one for my place and one for Wayne Lakes. But I can, if you want to have one, I can give them your name and I will pick one up for you to stick out. This is very important. The Ohio legislature just changed the rules again. They changed the wording on the ballot, so it won't say, all it will say is, it'll say unborn.
Again, you're being political.
No, I'm educated.
In a church.
I'm educated in the church.
You're not advocating my view necessarily.
No, but I can educate what the state legislature is doing.
In the church? Why do you want to bring politics into a religious community?
Because this is a religious vote. This vote determines.
In your opinion.
I'd like to start the regular session.
Okay. Hey, you're ready to make it. You feeling okay? Hey, everything's slowly today.
Cecil and Dolly.
You got more? I don't have one. I didn't grab one since I was on.
I have an extra. Anybody need one? Do you need any more, Mike? I have an extra.
I think we're okay.
Yes, you're live and everything's ready to go.
Hi, Cecil.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to the First Universalist Church of New Madison. And let me begin by sharing these words from Sherry Woodbury, which I've edited only slightly. In our circle again. Here we are in our circle again. A circle of vision and reflection, a forum for deciding and empowering. Here we are at the base of another bridge, another space spanning the shores of today and tomorrow, beckoning us to cross the chasm one day at a time. Here we are, gathered at the cusp of the future, at the boundary that holds community together. Here we are in a circle of love and trust, brought to this moment by a series of choices and promises, by hope and gratitude, by our own shadows faced and befriended. Somewhere out there, all we dream is possible. Somewhere in here, we are sowing seeds. Before we move on, are there any announcements? I take that to be a no. You'll notice that Roberta is not here. And Lloyd had agreed quite some time ago to fill in as the musician for El Dorado this morning. So we won't be having any music, even though Claire volunteered to do Heart and Soul. I think I'm going to find a way to talk our way through it. It did remind me how much I appreciate our music and our musicians. And I talked to Roberta 3 times this week about the music. We selected the hymns really early, but she's just not well. She doesn't sound herself. And she called me early this morning. She can't come in. So we're going to enter our sacred time together without a prelude. While we do the chalice lighting, maybe you could pretend that Roberta is playing Morning Has Broken. So Tim, I'll take your help now with the chalice lighting. May the light we now kindle inspire us to use our powers to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to bless and not to curse, to serve you, Spirit of freedom. Thank you. So our opening hymn would have been number 323. I think what I'd like to do is ask you to turn to that page in your hymnal, even though we're not going to sing it. When I choose the hymns, and I usually do that really early in the process, I have 2 criteria in mind. One is that the words fit with the theme of the morning. And the theme this morning is boundaries, borders, and barriers. So take a look, if you would, at the words here about the circle of love. And particularly towards the end of that first verse. So I look for words. And I also look for a melody that's singable, which matters less right now. In fact, Roberta played this for me on the piano at her house while I listened on the phone to make sure that it should be singable. So breaking out the circle. And this has to do with moving the circle to be inclusive and doing a little bit something about boundaries. So, I hope you've had a chance to at least get the gist of the hymn. We'll move now to the affirmation, which is printed in the order of service. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve human needs, to the end that all souls shall grow in harmony with one another. We're a caring community where we share special joys that lift our hearts and concerns which bring us pain. In these times, we are heard. When we are heard, we are honored. When we are honored, we can move toward healing. We'll light a candle now in honor of those joys and sorrows now shared. The last time I spoke, which was several months ago, the first candle that I lit was in appreciation for the people who keep this church community going. And even though I just did that in June, I think it's worthy of saying it again. So for Paula and Chaz, for Tim, for Mike, for Roberta and Lloyd, boy, I knew when Roberta couldn't come, I was going to miss the music. And I do. It may abbreviate our service a bit, but I think we're all going to miss the music. So for all of you who do your part, Emerson with the phone and stuff, Kenny with everything that he does, including keeping the camera pointed the right direction. To all of you, thanks so much.
And to you for contributing a service every couple months.
Okay, all right. And we always light a candle for the people of Ukraine. I think this morning when you hear the topic, you're going to think this is particularly appropriate. It's always appropriate, though. What other joys and sorrows are there to share?
We still have the people of Libya and the people of Turkey. The scenes of tremendous either floods, earthquakes, natural disasters. It fades from awareness. You know, last week it was all over the news. This week you see nothing. Situations aren't resolved. The hardship goes on. Our
American news attention span isn't very long, certainly not as long as it's going to take the folks in Libya and Turkey and Morocco to recover from the natural disasters that have affected them. So that's one little candle needs to cover a lot of folks and a lot of heartache.
Night of joy and a concern together. Curly, my standardbred pacer, is now back at the track in training, so that's a joy. The concern is he took a years off because of leg injury, so he now has 2 expensive leg braces that he's wearing, so we're in hopes that he will be able to race again.
Here's for Curly, his health and his racing career.
I'd like to wish Kenny safe travels next week.
Yeah, I got a joy and a concern. I'm going to leave next Thursday morning, bright and early, for the Washington, D.C. Veterans trip.
Oh, good.
It's a bus trip, 4 days up and 4 days, 3 nights, returning late Sunday evening. So, yeah, sounds like it's going to be a full weekend.
Yes, it does.
The concern is, got word yesterday afternoon that niece in El Dorado passed away. Ed Baker's wife, Ellen. She had been in the hospital since Labor Day and did not make it.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So for Kenny, a joy and a sorrow, an upcoming trip to Washington, D.C. with the veterans, but also the sorrow of losing his niece.
Another joy then, October 7th, I've got a sister-in-law that's going to celebrate her 100th birthday.
Oh my gosh.
What's her name, Kenny?
Belva Baker.
Belva Baker, 100.
Having an open house at El Dorado United Methodist Church, Saturday afternoon, October 7th.
100.
100 years.
I'd like to light a candle for Kay Stephen and her family. Kay is a member of the New Madison Public Library Board, and so are Mike and I, and so was Kenny for a long time. So Kay's very active in the community. Just about a week and a half ago, she was so delighted with the birth of her first grandchild, a lovely little boy, healthy. Her daughter and son-in-law are ecstatic. And then barely a week later, her mother passed away. So if you happen to know Mary Strasman, who was also active with the library, then this candle's for Kay, for a joy and a concern. And I may be out of candles, folks. Candles that work. Okay, pretend this one has a light. Just like we pretended we sang a hymn. Any other joys and concerns? This last candle then is for any unspoken joys and concerns that remain in our heart. So I guess we've come to the point in the service where I share some remarks, some thoughts. This one I think has been a little harder for me than usual because it's so distressing and because I have not a clue in the world maybe what can be done other than continuing to make all of us aware. I'm calling it boundaries, borders, and barriers. Boundaries, borders, and barriers are three words that sound a bit alike. They have overlapping meanings. And this morning, I invite you to explore with me not only the meaning of these words, but their implications for the lives of human beings. Boundaries, a line that marks the limit of an area, a dividing line. So a boundary can be a mountain range, a river. It can be something we impose on ourselves so that, we have our own barriers about behavior we won't do, for example. Heavens, our skin is a barrier between us and the rest of the world. And there are permeable and impermeable barriers. So that's a boundary. I should just said barrier, didn't I? I wanted to say boundaries, but in any case. Then we move to borders, and borders are, by contrast, not a river, not a mountain range, although they may overlay those things. They are a line separating two political or geographical areas, especially countries. So borders are man-made. And take a look at that map. That's a map of the world with all the, we think, all the borders drawn in. All the man-made lines. Now, if you look at this map and you look at the globe that our daughter Claire had when she was in high school, you'd find that some of these lines have moved. Some of the names have moved. If you look at a map of France in the 1200s, it would not be the France you see there. They're man-made. They're moved by wars, occasionally treaties, but they move. But when they're in force, they're in force. And then let's talk about barriers. A fence or another obstacle that prevents movement or access. A boundary or a border can also be a barrier. A mountain range, for example, could be a barrier for getting from one place to another. So I've been thinking about this topic a lot. Why? Two recent conversations. Earlier this month, our book club, and our daughter Claire and I belong to the same book club in Greenville. We read American Dirt. This novel follows the harrowing story, and it is a novel, the harrowing story of a middle-class woman and her young son who flee Acapulco to go to the United States. They flee violence, horrific violence. And I can't seem to get their story out of my mind. Now, granted, it was fiction, but it convinced me in the reading and things I've read since that it was very much what folks go through. And then the second thing, I said there were two conversations. At the church picnic 2 weeks ago, Ty and I had a brief discussion about protecting U.S. borders. It was clear that he saw the issue differently than I did, which is always the good basis for a discussion, isn't it, when there's more than one point of view. We are, all of us here, Americans. I think I can safely say that. We are also citizens of the world. And while we'd like to believe that those two allegiances, being an American and a citizen of the world, are compatible, they're not always, comfortable together, those two allegiances. And we here are also Unitarian Universalists. We have that in common. UU principles color the way we look at the world. In fact, UU principles may color our views, but that's very different from saying that we all have the same viewpoint. We do not see things identically. Here, in this small town setting, which I treasure, we value many of the same things. family, education, good health, kindness and compassion. But we still have different viewpoints on various subjects, perhaps even radically different viewpoints. Of course we do. You might even say that makes life more interesting, and occasionally more troubling. So let's wade into a hot topic: borders and border protection. I'll start by sharing what 3 U.S. presidents have had to say. Ronald Reagan: a nation that cannot control its borders is not a nation. I think that's true. And what defines a nation more than knowing where its borders are? Jimmy Carter, and the quote that's at the top of the order of service: whether the borders that divide us are picket fences or national boundaries, we are all neighbors in a global community. I believe that is also true. And it sounds as if Jimmy may be part you. Barack Obama, and similar to Jimmy Carter, we are defined not by our borders, but by our bonds. Three different, important, and influential men. 3 statements that all seem correct. Now, I imagine that when I talk about national borders, your thoughts go to the U.S.-Mexican border. Naturally. The immigration problem continues to make news and lead to political finger-pointing of the ugliest kind. It creates terrible problems, not only for the immigrants, but for communities in Texas and Arizona and elsewhere. It represents an almost unimaginable humanitarian crisis. People, these are people, human beings, some of whom have walked 1,000 miles to seek a better life. But let's look beyond the Americas for a moment. The UN estimates there are 108 million people who have been forcibly displaced, either within their own country or as refugees, since 1948. 108 million. And if 1948 sounds familiar, that's because it was the year that Israel was created, carved out of Palestine. So, people as old as I am, who were once in Palestine, are now refugees, and their kids and their grandkids. And even though you could say by now maybe that should be home, it's not home. They view Palestine as their home. And right now, after a decade of conflict, Syria remains the world's largest refugee crisis. I've read so many statistics and so many articles and so much stuff, and I have made a concerted effort to share only some of it with you. But if you care to look at this, it's truly astounding, and it's truly worldwide. So now we're in Syria. It is the world's largest refugee crisis. This is according to UN estimates. Remember Syria? Its refugee crisis has long since fallen off the front page. Since 2011, more than 14 million Syrians have been forced to flee their homes in search of safety. Of those, approximately 5.5 million refugees live in the 5 neighboring countries: Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, and Egypt. And if it wasn't enough to have to leave their homes, both Syria and Turkey are still suffering today from disastrous earthquakes earlier this year. Germany is the largest non-neighboring country, host country for Syrian refugees, with over 850,000. And you know how it all began? In 2011, some Syrian teenagers put anti-government graffiti on a wall. Teenagers, graffiti on a wall. When they were arrested, there were protests all throughout Syria. And that's when the Assad government began a crackdown. Violence escalated. It resulted in government airstrikes. Airstrikes on your own country. Bombs. The Arab League did not condemn President Assad. Russia and China continued to provide military support. And so with their homes in rubble, their streets unsafe, people grabbed their children, a few belongings, and ran. Wouldn't we do the same? And more recently, doesn't this sound a little bit like Ukraine? In the case of Ukraine, it's not their own government that's bombing them, but their neighbor, Russia. Bombs, airstrikes. But people are left to make a choice. Do I stay or do I run? Do I grab my kids? Where do I go? And if your house is just completely gone, you gotta go. It's estimated that 12 million Ukrainians have had to leave their homes. Some of them have found other places to go in Ukraine. And others are going to neighboring countries where, so far, they're being welcomed pretty well and treated well, much better than some of the Syrian refugees have encountered. So, around the world, families are fleeing war and violence. In our lifetime, even though I always talk a lot, when I talk continuously like this, my throat gets dry. Thank you, Jim. So, around the world, families are fleeing war and violence. In our lifetimes, we have known of significant refugee issues from the Balkans, from various countries in Africa. Think of Somalia. Think of Nigeria. From Afghanistan. From so many countries. And yes, from Central and South America. So, let's turn our attention back to the southern U.S. border. Today, the countries that are sending the most migrants to the U.S. border are Guatemalan, Honduran, and El Salvadoran. They have to travel all the way through Mexico to get to the border, and Mexico's a big country, north to south. I could provide lots more statistics and examples, but please stay with me just a little longer. After decades of political violence, people living in Honduras, and I've chosen Honduras as one country to look at, are experiencing warlike levels of violence. Warlike levels. But now, this is not political violence. It's gang-related violence. These gangs are big. They're extremely well organized. You could compare them to a corporation or a government. They're so powerful. So it's gang violence. So imagine, what does a 10-year-old Honduran kid do? And they recruit young, these gangs. What does the kid do when the gang says, join us or we'll kill your whole family? That's not an unheard of example. In fact, that's a tactic to recruit children into gangs. So what does he do? He either joins the gang or his whole family flees. And they start that long, long walk. Why are the gangs so powerful? What's keeping them afloat financially? Drugs. Drugs and gang violence are intertwined, and that includes in our country as well. Where do many of the drugs end up? From Honduras and El Salvador and so forth and so on. In the U.S. It's just economics, isn't it? Supply and demand. The U.S. demand pulls the drugs up. They pull them up the long, long corridor of Central America and Mexico. Not an inconsiderable logistics effort is required to make that happen. So there's always a pull and a push, right? The demand in the U.S. pulls the drugs up. And the violence caused by the drug trade pushes families from their homes. And where do they come? They come towards the United States of America, where things will be better. So here we are. Why do I bring this up in church of all places? First of all, because we're UUs. Because we do think of ourselves as citizens of the world. And you know, isn't there something about that word universalist? Think of it, universalist. Because we are citizens of the world and citizens of the U.S. There's no question I'm proud to be an American. I've always been proud to be American, although I will tell you that in the last 10 years that has tarnished a bit. But it doesn't take away the fact that I'm proud to be from this country and of this country. I don't think America's perfect. I don't think any of us think it's perfect. Far from it. I bring up this topic of, so I'm not keeping up with my own slides. Tim, bless his heart, he makes these things for me and then I don't do what I'm supposed to do. But let me see here. Nope.
Should be an arrow to the right button on the bottom.
Tim, I think the problem is I don't see the arrow.
Maybe it's disappeared. I've had trouble with this right here.
Ah, so there's the quote we saw earlier from Jimmy Carter. That's what the world looks like without all those lines drawn on it. Now, I don't think we could have one world government. I don't think we're close to it. I'm not sure it's desirable. But that's how the world looks, without all those divisions in it. And there's the divisions again, this time with names on them. But I bring up this whole subject of boundaries, barriers, and borders because I think if we dismiss the plight of immigrants and refugees, then we risk being trapped behind our own borders. And now I'm not talking about national borders. I'm talking about the borders of the mind, being open to not only new experiences, but new ways of thinking, new ways of expressing our common bond with humanity. I don't think we want those borders to close down and get tighter. But when there's so much bad news, it is almost too much to take in. After all, what can we do? Does this feeling of helplessness lead to numbness or, worse yet, blaming the victims? It can lead to that, but when it does, we add another brick to that imaginary wall that we're putting around ourselves. So again, what can we do? I don't know the answer, by the way. I'm sure you know that I don't know the answer. First thing we can do, though, is stay aware. Look beyond the headlines. Develop empathy for all the victims. And in fact, there are more victims than the obvious ones. What about the border guards, the Border Patrol guards with PTSD? What about the decisions they have to make every day and what they're doing to their psyche? When we had the book club meeting earlier this month, the person who led the discussion of American Dirt, the Mexican woman who fled Acapulco, our discussion leader had interviewed a gentleman from Homeland Security who was occasionally, for periods of time, loaned to the Border Patrol. What he talked about is people get to the border. If they are refugees fleeing violence, that's the way you can gain immediate admission to the U.S., the only way. Can you imagine, and all the various immigrants know this, so everyone has a horror story. Some of those are real, terrible, true. Probably many of them are real, terrible, true. But how do you interview a person and figure that out? I can't imagine. I cannot imagine. And he really didn't even have the answer other than try to ask the right questions and listen, really listen. I mean, occasionally there will be proof, but not often. So, as I said, there are more victims than the ones that are obvious. There are the communities that don't know what to do with all these extra folks living on their streets. Now, in those communities, there's almost always a refugee group, sometimes homegrown, that's doing everything they can to help. The Catholic Church is often very involved in helping. So, I'm on the question, I'm digressing a bit, forgive me. I'm on the so what can we do question. I already said stay aware, look beyond the headlines, develop empathy for all the victims. But staying aware isn't much of an answer. It's just a tiny, tiny start. We can press our elected officials to stop finger pointing and to start to work together. But how optimistic do we feel about that right now? We can help refugee organizations with our time, our money. Lou and Denise took in a refugee family before they moved up here where they are now. So once people get past the border, they still need help. But it all starts with being aware. Boundaries. Borders, barriers. Let's work with the physical ones and work to eliminate the harmful ones in our minds. It's your turn.
I'd like to look at the Earth as far as boundaries go, as the Apollo astronauts came around the moon and they saw the full Earth, big blue marble.
I didn't know if you could all hear Emerson. He talked about looking at the Earth as the astronauts did on that first trip to the moon when they got far enough away to see the big blue marble and realize that here we all are on this not so very big place. It points out the shared nature of our planet and our humanity. Other comments? Margaret.
My thoughts are going in a million directions, so I'm going to try to corral them. My sister lives in New York City, as you know. She lives in Hell's Kitchen. and she's been there since 1983, I think. And we talk on the phone sometimes. Our recent conversation was about immigration. I don't know that she and I see eye to eye on it, and there's a reason for that, which I'll get into in a second. But this was right around when New York's turned the Roosevelt Hotel into a station where immigrants can come, go through the red tape and all that kind of thing and, you know, figure it out. Well, Mary that's my sister, she had an appointment down around that area, and she went down there, and the main artery is blocked off with police barriers because there are so many immigrants in New York that they are lined up for blocks and blocks and blocks, and they're just living on the street. They're pissing there, they're shitting there, they're trying to eat and sleep there, just out on the street because there is just no place for them. And, you know, I think about Dayton as being that we were one of the first sanctuary cities acknowledged in the whole country, was Dayton, Ohio. And that problem is not in our face to that degree. I mean, if I go downtown, I don't see what my sister sees. And this goes on for weeks and weeks, and some of these people are like being bussed in to New York City from other cities around the country because they're making political statements and just want to dump them there. And New York is all blah because they're saying Biden won't help us, and I'm not going to go into that whole discussion. But you can see why my sister would have a different outlook on immigration because it's in her face more than it is in our face.
Way more.
Now, I went to a volunteer fair for seniors because I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do to help the world. And one of the topics there was immigration, and we actually had some immigrants speak to the audience about what happens to them when they get here. They got to learn the language, learn the culture, you know, blah, 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 get a job. And there are government agencies and programs that help them, but after, I forget how many days it was, something like 120 days, when all these programs run out, they all have cutoffs. Then the people are still just left on their own. And they don't know what to do, you know. So this one volunteer group is trying to address that issue. Okay, so that was where one of my thoughts was about New York, and the other one was about this volunteer group. This week in the paper was an article about what's going on in Springfield, Ohio. Their big influx is people from Haiti right now, and I haven't checked out these statistics, so I don't know if they're accurate, but the report was up to 10,000 people have come into Springfield from Haiti in a short period of time, like maybe the past year or something like that. And the city commission held a public meeting about this. Well, you can imagine that, okay? It got so disruptive, that the meeting had to totally be stopped and brought back to order like 3 different times. At one point, the citizens were calling them the Haitian invaders, and it was them. So it's a big issue locally, even Springfield's a small town. I mean, not compared to New Madison, but it's like Sandusky, where I grew up. And that's not a big place, but it's got these big national problems. So they are right in our face. And one commissioner was like pounding the gavel and everything to get things to order. And she had some really good things to say about what you were talking about. Universalism, we are all global neighbors, and to discuss this, we need to treat each other with respect. We can't discuss it if we don't treat each other with respect, which I thought was a really good point. And then later in the week, I got this one. I'm going to leave this one back there because I actually had presence of mind to cut it out, bring it. Tony Hall, ex-Congressman Tony Hall from Dayton, he does all kinds of humanitarian stuff with food banks and all this kind of thing. And he writes this editorial, we need to demand better from our lawmakers. That's what the subject line is. And even though this isn't directly about immigration, the points that he brings up are the ability to talk with each other. You don't have to talk to each other, we can talk with each other when we disagree about stuff. It was exactly what you were saying at one point in your talk, that I can't remember your exact words now. I'm getting a little flummoxed, but I'll leave this back there so you guys can read it at your leisure. It was really good, it doesn't take that long to read it. But I'm very concerned about this issue. I've never seen such bad behavior. People that are in trouble and they get blamed for coming here. I don't know where to go with it, other than contacting that volunteer group again. Yeah.
You really brought it to life, Margaret, with the blocks and blocks and blocks of people. It's awful.
Yeah.
And I understand why your sister and others would have a real hard time with it. I have to wonder, frankly, since these are the people we're naming are brown-skinned and black-skinned, if that doesn't play at least a little role.
Oh, hell yeah.
The Ukrainians who have come over have been much more welcome. Of course, they've been so obviously the victim of state-to-state violence. But, thank you. Anybody else? Emerson?
I was a problem before. I lived in Europe. I didn't speak the language. I dressed different.
Yep. There are all kinds of ways for someone to be identified as the other.
I have a simple solution. I'm not sure exactly why it doesn't work. If you drive through Salem Avenue in Dayton, actually if you drive through Greenville, you will see houses that are abandoned. They're in the process of, nobody pays taxes on them, so they're being foreclosed on by the city or taken by the city. There are people who need housing. There are empty houses. There are people who need jobs. There are jobs renovating these houses. It would seem to be, to me, a simple solution to take the people who have no homes, let them actually live in these homes while they're renovating them. That may sound strange, but I've done that a couple different times, and it seems to work pretty well. Basically, all you need is a kitchen and a bathroom to start. And the bathroom can be very simple. All it needs to be is a toilet and a sink. In the kitchen, all it has to be is an outlet and a hot plate and a refrigerator. You don't have to have a completely renovated house. Habitat for Humanity does a really good job of scarfing up abandoned, donated, leftover windows, paint, flooring, furniture. This country throws away an amazing amount of stuff at the landfill which could be reused. All it takes, I think, is organization and someone with the ability to convince lawmakers to contribute a little bit of money, what it would take to renovate some of these houses and put some of these people in.
And it seems to me there's an economic argument that we've never squarely faced in this country. Even before the refugees fleeing violence in Central America, I mean, there have been people coming across the Mexican border for a long time. And those folks came because they found jobs and then they had to kind of hide in plain sight. And look at, especially during the recent COVID thing, when supply chains shut down and companies didn't have workers, and there's still some of that going on. Maybe it's time to admit that we do need folks who will take some of the jobs that typically many Americans don't want to do, and allow for a more reasonable approach to having that work done and create jobs and allow people to the foot up that goes to the next foot up, and certainly for their children. I mean, how many Somalian taxi drivers are there in New York, for example? And some of those people were doctors and engineers. Lou!
In my previous life, I was working, myself and another chemist had to go to the southern, to go to Tennessee, in the southern part of Tennessee. The city or town, I can't remember what the name is, but it was with this Emerson Climate Technologies. And so we went there and we found out that a significant number of workers were Bosnian, Herzegovinian Muslims. And this town, I wish I could remember it, took them in, these refugees. And what was interesting to me is their boss, the guy that we were communicating with, was Serbian. And I asked, well, how's that going? I don't know if you remember the wars there, over there. And he said, actually, it's not going too bad. We don't talk politics. So there's some things that are going well. We need to keep that in mind, too. So.
Thank you. Thank you. Shall we move on? Okay, it's time to take the offering. So again, pretend that Roberta is playing something. And if you could bring your gifts forward, I'll share these words. We give to remind ourselves how many gifts we have to offer. We give to remember that we are part of something bigger than ourselves. We give because we believe in music and sacred space. We give with the faith that together we have enough.
I am coming up here with a lively tune, you mind?
Excuse me.
I love the doxology. I love the music, frankly. I'm tempted to sit at the piano and try to pick it out, but I'm not going to. So take a moment and...
If you want some music, a little bit of music, I'll lead it.
Okay.
From all that dwell below the skies, let songs of hope and faith arise. Let peace, goodwill on earth be sung, through every land, by every tongue.
Thanks,
There's a little
Ty.
music.
music. Claire asked if I was going to do some of this a cappella, and my fear was if I did that, you'd all talk about fleeing, you would all flee. I'm going to skip straight to extinguishing the chalice with these words. Take courage, friends. The way is often hard, the path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage, for deep down there is another truth. We are not alone. And that's it, folks.
And we do have a offshoot of Between the Ears.
Oh, thank you.
Actually, and I also threw in, here's a little picture of the Rio Grande River and another kind of barrier. This is, I just couldn't pass this up. We've all heard of jumping horses. Let's see this. This girl, this is in Germany, is riding a Hereford cow and teaching this cow to jump.
And who said barriers can't be overcome?
Exactly.
You won't bump your head when you get up here.
No. And probably it's not going to play. It plays at home. So I guess you'll just have to imagine that her riding that cow, and then she comes back and raises the barrier even higher.
Maybe we can find it on the internet ourselves.
There's donuts and coffee.
What is the difference between integration and migration? Everybody's searching for a better place.
And what's the difference between a refugee and an immigrant? Now that's a little clearer. A refugee is generally, an immigrant can be an immigrant by choice. They want to go somewhere. A refugee is a strong implication there's something awful they have to get away from.
Right, and gee, there's the American dream, and the land is a better place. And it's like, gee, that's why you bless our here, because that's what our families did. And we invaded upon the people who were already here.
Yes, yeah, I thought about bringing that in, but I couldn't expand that much. Keep it to an hour.
Yeah. And Tim, my opinion on that sign, you know, it's that would be better a 30-second elevator speech and voice of concern, or what a UU Action Committee type of report. But some of us come here for church, and
What you're referring to?
the sign.
The sign.
Yeah, I personally don't object to the sign, but yet when we come here for church and you have somebody that, hey, this may be offensive as a church position, I support that. But then there are avenues left in the church where we can introduce that and say as the joyous concerns, now instead of an official church position, it's your opinion being put out as education.
Yeah, education is neutral. I don't have to say I'm for this or against it. All I have to say is this is what the legislature is doing.
Right.
This is the proposed amendment. This is how they changed the wording. You need to be aware of this because when you go in to do your voting, you're going to read the amendment and you're not going to know the background.
Yeah.
And I don't have to say, I just assumed everybody here was of that mind. If they're not, I can be neutral.
Yeah, we should be neutral. With as close to neutral as you can. We're never going to be totally neutral.
Well, and we're not neutral because we're a a Universalist church that believes in supporting the rights of all people. And when the legislature tries to take the rights away from people, that's kind of where we want to step in.
Yeah.
But I don't have a problem with Dick if you don't want to hear about it in church. But I still can do it during the announcements.
Yeah, I would think like Joyce is a concern,
Right.
make it an elevator speech, and move on.
Well, and
That's just my opinion.
yeah, and I support that entirely, but that's probably going to be the topic of the next presentation, will be the church's place in politics. And you can see conservative churches, the Catholic Church donated over $2 million to the anti-abortion amendment. The vote no.
Yeah, the churches are involved.
Yeah, they are involved, and there's many fundamentalist churches that take an actual position, and you're not allowed in the church to say vote for this person or that person, but you can take a position on issues.
Yeah.
Educate, and that's all this is an issue.
It's an issue.
And I think it's.
And I think the issue was maybe inappropriately forced upon everybody, and I support fully what you're doing, but today's topic about boundaries.
Yep, that's what we're talking about, exactly.